All right, friends, it's time to give you loyal listeners a discount on protein powder. You may or may not know, but I launched my very first protein powder 2 years ago. It's a grass-fed beef isolate with only 3 ingredients: grass-fed beef, either organic cacao or organic vanilla, and organic monk fruit. Now, if you don't want any of the added flavor and sweeteners, you can also just get unflavored. And no matter what flavor you choose, you're getting over 23 grams of protein per scoop, which is going to keep you full and satisfied between meals. I love starting my day with a Fab4 smoothie and breaking my fast with that much protein. It makes a serious difference in my cravings and blood sugar balance the rest of the day, and I've seen it with my clients as well. Now, I never thought I'd own a product company, but when I got pregnant with Sebastian, I realized the majority of protein powders were chemically extracted or enzymatically extracted, and I wanted to use heat and water only. I wanted minimal ingredients because we don't need those emulsifiers, fillers, or added vitamins, minerals, and probiotics. All of those additions increase the chances that it's not going to work for your body, whether it be bloating, digestion issues. I just wanted pure, clean protein to keep you full and satisfied so you could build the most delicious Fab4 smoothie. And I have to say, I'm pretty proud of the flavor. If you take a look at our reviews on Amazon, you'll see 5-star reviews for flavor. And that is key, because if you don't love your Fab4 smoothie and you don't love drinking your protein powder, you're not going to do it. It won't become a habit, and it's consistency that outpaces everything. So if you're here and you're listening and you want to give our protein powder a try, use the code podcast5 for $5 off your order. And let me know if you love it. My favorite ways to apply this protein powder is in my Fab4 smoothie, making freezer fudge, making chocolate milk, making hot chocolate, and throwing the unflavored into all my kids' baked goods. So let me know how you use it. Let me know if you love it, and share this podcast deal with your friends. Today's guest is a repeat offender. Dr. Sarah Gottfried's newest book, Women, Food, and Hormones, is out this September, and I wanted to bring her back to discuss what she found. Dr. Sarah Gottfried is a board-certified physician who graduated from Harvard and MIT. She practices evidence-based integrative precision and functional medicine. She's a clinical assistant professor in the Department of Integrative Medicine and Nutritional Sciences at Thomas Jefferson University, and the director of precision medicine at the Marcus Institute of Integrative Health. Her 3 New York Times bestselling books include The Hormone Cure, The Hormone Reset Diet, and Younger. So let's welcome Sarah back to the show. Today's guest is a repeat offender, Dr. Sarah Gottfried. I had to bring her back because her new book, Women, Food, and Hormones, is out. It's amazing. I had to write a review for it. It's Dr. Gottfried's work, but for the women out there searching for answers, Dr. Gottfried, thank you for joining me. Thank you for writing this book. And I'm so excited for people to get their hands on it.
Oh, thanks, Kelly. So happy to be here.
It's always a informative, educational, and fun conversation with you. So let's jump into what brought you to write about women, food, and hormones.
Yeah, this book was really based on a struggle that I had with food, with blood sugar, with my hormones. And, you know, I felt like I sort of figured things out after I had kids in my 30s. You know, I had come up with this balanced meal plan that really worked well for helping with estrogen, progesterone, cortisol. And then after 40, I just kind of hit a wall. I just felt like my metabolism was grinding to a halt. I didn't have that metabolic flexibility that I had when I was younger. And so I needed some, new techniques. And I tried keto, and I was one of those keto refugees because keto just didn't work for me. I tried it a few times because I'm kind of stubborn. And once I realized that, the way that men do keto and are really successful with it is very different than the way that women often need to be successful when they try something like a ketogenic diet. So that was really the basis for this book.
I'd love to go through what an example is of how men do keto and what you see in your practice is working for men, how women start to use that and why it doesn't work, and maybe what your recommendations are.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in some ways, this is based on a lot of trial and error, and then really looking at the literature and trying to understand, okay, based on the differences hormonally, like with the metabolic hormones between men and women. Men, of course, have more testosterone. They've got that testosterone advantage. They've got more muscle mass. They tend to exercise more. And so their glucose disposal is a little different than what we see in women. We also have more estrogen, of course. And I think that's really the major difference, the difference in estrogen as well as testosterone. There's some other hormonal differences such as growth hormone, but I think estrogen and testosterone are really the key. And what I found is that when men go on keto, and the classic example here is that my husband and I went on a ketogenic diet together, and he dropped like 20 pounds in such a rapid period of time. And I was just like watching the fat drop off of him. And I was really struggling. I mean, maybe I lost 2 pounds, and I don't think that it was fat. So, watching this progress with my husband then made me look to my practice and see, okay, what are some of the differences here? And I think the main thing when it comes to estrogen is that women really need detoxification. They need to be pooping every single day to get rid of estrogen, because the golden rule of estrogen is that you want to use it and then you want to lose it. You don't want it recirculating in your body like bad karma. And when that happens, it tends to overstimulate a lot of your tissues. Your gut is such an important part of this process. So what I found was that women really need detoxification. They need their detox pathways open for keto to be successful. And then they also, because of this testosterone disadvantage, they really need to be mindful of some of the diet and lifestyle things that help to keep their testosterone where we want it to be. So not so high that you're, bulking up, but high enough that you're able to really see a response to this change in terms of macronutrients. So those are some of the key differences. Happy to go down any of these rabbit holes that you're interested
I
in.
love all your rabbit holes. Let's do it. So I want to keep everyone's detox pathways open. I love that you said you need to be pooping every day. I don't think people realize that estrogen is used in the body and then you dump it into your bowels and you're supposed to poop it out. But if you don't poop it out, it can be reabsorbed. So I love that you made that point. But what other ways are we keeping detoxification pathways open?
Well, a big part of pooping every day is that you've got sufficient fiber. And I love how you talk about this too, because fiber is just one of those unsung heroes of the diet. I feel like it's so important for blood glucose stability, for metabolic flexibility. And we know that, only about 14% of US women get sufficient fiber. And I just think that's a crisis. Like, we really need to address that. And, another thing that happens, I'm sure you've seen this too in your practice, so many people go on classic keto and they're having their fat bombs and their, bacon wrapped, shrimp, whatever it is. They, are sort of staying away from vegetables because of the carbs in the vegetables. And women really need those prebiotic fibers. They really need to have fiber to be able to poop sufficiently. I think there's for many of us, there's a threshold, a carb threshold that we need to be able to balance estrogen and to also help us with glucose and with insulin. So I think fiber is an essential part of this detoxification. And then, of course, there's the vegetables themselves, the cruciferous vegetables, the foods that are rich, like the allium vegetables, like onions, leeks, and garlic, that help us with glutathione management. All of those things are part of this detoxification picture.
I would love for you to explain to the audience what glutathione is.
Yeah, glutathione. So glutathione, I think of as the queen of antioxidants. It's like the mop in the body that just goes around and sort of cleans up all of those toxins that accumulate as a result of just living your life. There's this thing called oxidative stress. It's kind of like gluten. When you ask people what is gluten, very few people can actually tell you what it is. Same sort of thing with oxidative stress. The way that it's often described is that it's like rust in the body, sort of like, if you leave a car out in the elements and the weather for year after year, you get rust on the metal. And that's kind of what happens in the body, just as a result of breathing oxygen and creating reactive oxygen species. So glutathione goes in and deals with that oxidative stress. We generate more oxidative stress as a result of exercise and just living our lives. So we want to have this really good balance between the oxidative stress, but then mopping up the oxidative stress. And I especially find, I'm curious if you find this too, that a food-based approach to antioxidants, a plant-based approach to antioxidants is really how you go for the win here. I think supplements can also be helpful, but you can't out-supplement a bad diet. So we really want to focus on how do dietary nutrients help us with this oxidative stress problem.
Oh, I love that you said that, because one of the things that comes to mind for me is that the understanding that when we eat polyphenol rich foods, it actually increases the amount of polyphenols that we absorb, but it's not because we're absorbing that from our food. We have gut bugs that produce more polyphenols and support that so that we absorb more. I mean, that right there is just a testament to just taking a pill of polyphenol antioxidants is not going to create that environment in the gut that does that. And that's so key. I think we're missing the boat when we're just taking the nutrients from the plants themselves. We're missing the whole detoxification pathway that you're talking about here, and that increased absorption and bioavailability of those nutrients. Like, love that so much. And that example of mopping up that oxidative stress was so visual, so great for a podcast, as always. So detoxifying, just to wrap it up, pooping every day, making sure that we're getting fiber, making sure that we're getting those antioxidants and the specific types of veggies you're talking about, cruciferous veggies like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and your alliums like your leeks, onions, and garlic. This is just encouraging people to eat more plant-based foods and make food at home, which I love. So good already. What about testosterone? Talk to me about, you said we want to increase testosterone, but not too much so we're bulking up. How do we hit that balance?
Yeah, testosterone is so interesting because a lot of people think that the most abundant hormone in women is estrogen, but it's not. It's testosterone. So testosterone, if you look at the concentration, if you get your blood drawn and you're looking at these hormones, we could talk about a hormone panel maybe. Testosterone is definitely the most abundant. So even though women have about 10 times less than men, we are exquisitely sensitive to it. And it's involved in so many different things. I used to, when I went through my mainstream medical training, I paid a lot of attention to mostly estrogen and progesterone because that's what's emphasized, especially with fertility, a little bit on thyroid. But testosterone is really not emphasized unless, you have irregular periods and we start to go down that path of looking at polycystic ovary syndrome. So what does testosterone do? It's got about 400 jobs in the body. It's involved in confidence and agency, which I think is so important for us as women because, we're here to change the world and we need our testosterone to support us in doing that. It's involved, of course, in sex drive. I think that's probably what it's most famous for. But it's also involved in seeing a response when you're working out. So I'm a fan of the Peloton. I think you are too. Is that right, Kelly?
I need to start following you. Yeah, I love. That was like my saving grace during COVID.
Oh, sister, man, totally agree with that. It was my saving grace before COVID, but especially needed it during the pandemic. So yeah, we need to have testosterone to help us see a response to the exercise that we're doing. So it's part of, this whole virtuous cycle. You just mentioned that virtuous cycle in the gut. And I'd love to get back to that too. But there's this virtuous cycle that happens with exercising, seeing a response to it. And I think of exercise as such an important thing for the brain, but also for glucose disposal. The more that I'm focused, I do research on prediabetes. I help patients with reversing prediabetes and metabolic inflexibility. That's what the book is really about. And exercise is such an important piece of that. So you've got to, kind of manage the inputs in terms of nutrition and diet and the polyphenols and micronutrients, phytonutrients, et cetera. But then we also have to manage the output and making sure that we've got the right dose of all of these pieces. And the sad news with testosterone is that levels start to decline usually in your 20s. So you hear this especially for men, Maybe they don't wake up with an erection over a certain age, like 40. But for women also, there's this decline of about 1% per year that starts in your 20s. And if you're someone who's a bit of a stress case, like I used to be, what we know is that it declines faster, more like 2% per year. So it may not show up kind of suddenly unless you have your ovaries removed, which is one of the major places that you make testosterone as a woman. But it can be this gradual decline so that you wake up at 40 or 41 and you're like, what's going on? What's with these kimono arms that I have? Like, why am I not seeing a response to the weightlifting, the weight training, the strength training I'm doing on Peloton? So testosterone has its hands in all of these different pieces. It's really a hormone of vitality.
Wow, it's so, so important. So when you're looking at blood tests and someone's looking at their Quest diagnostic workup from their OBGYN or from their internist, what numbers should they be looking for when it comes to testosterone?
Yeah, so with testosterone for women, what I like to look at is total testosterone, free testosterone. Sometimes I'll look at bioavailable testosterone because some of the libido literature is based on that. And what I'm looking for is for women to be in the top half of the normal range. So that's what I consider to be a healthy level. The problem is the research, of which there's not enough, of course, in women. There's a lot in men on low testosterone, but the research in women is really lacking. And we haven't seen an association between, for instance, libido and testosterone. There is data showing that, if we augment someone's testosterone level, a woman with low libido, as an example, that can be associated with improved sex drive. But one of the markers that does indicate low sex drive, that kind of is I think of them as sort of the background with testosterone levels, are DHEA and cortisol. So there was just a study by Rosemary Basson showing that low DHEA and low cortisol can be associated with low sex drive. So they didn't see a difference in testosterone, but these are, the DHEA, of course, is a precursor to testosterone. So we want to be paying attention to this whole hormonal tree. So to answer your question, top half of the normal range is what I'm looking for.
I love that. So you talk about DHEA and cortisol being like the background hormones to testosterone. Can you explain why?
Yeah, well, this relates to the point I was making about how in your 20s, you start to decrease your testosterone levels. And the decrease is accelerated if you're a stress case. So, my story, I didn't measure my cortisol levels until I was in my 30s. But I found that my level was about 3 times what it should have been. So you can imagine, there's this whole frat party happening in my body where, testosterone was off. I had estrogen dominance. Because cortisol was so high, I wasn't making enough progesterone to balance my estrogen. So that's a pretty typical picture when it comes to the role of cortisol. So if you're someone who runs around with high cortisol, and then over time, that can lead to low cortisol, just kind of a burnout picture. That's associated with more problems with testosterone.
I see. I love that. And when it comes to DHEA, I have worked with functional MDs that supplement with that. Do you ever supplement with DHEA, or how would you use that with clients?
I sure do. So pretty much every patient I work with, whether it's a 35-year-old woman who's trying to get pregnant, or a 45-year-old woman who's in perimenopause, or an NBA player, I do a full hormone panel to just see, okay, where are we? What's the base case here? So DHEA is such an important hormone because it converts to testosterone then converts to the estrogens, that then converts to the estrogen metabolites, which are part of the story that we're talking about with the gut and with recirculation of estrogen metabolites, and how if you keep recirculating, keep stimulating those estrogen receptors, of which there are 6 now, we know that that's associated with a greater risk of breast cancer, endometrial cancer, as well as prostate cancer in men. So DHEA is really important. It's also got, kind of a long job description. It's probably one of the most important immune modulators. So I would say progesterone and also DHEA are the two most important in terms of modulating the immune system. So what I see all the time, I take care of a lot of patients, especially women with autoimmune disease. And I'll see kind of this burnout picture where cortisol is low. Maybe they have a flat diurnal cortisol pattern. That's the 4-point cortisol that we look at, or a flat cortisol awakening response. Those are some of the tests that I like to run. And when we see that, often DHEA is low. And those folks tend to have less immunomodulation. So they're more likely to have this overzealous response. That's an oversimplification of an autoimmune process, but that's a really common thing that I see. I saw a patient yesterday who's got multiple autoimmune diseases, and her DHEA, when I first met her, was like in the 70s to 80s. And so this is a woman who's in her 40s, and I generally in your 40s, you adjust it by age, I want to keep DHEA around 150 to 200, even higher in younger women.
Wow. It's amazing to think, like, when you see these panels of women, that they've probably been pushing through their life and pushing through the stress and just adding an extra cup of coffee in the morning and making it worse.
Well, this is heartbreaking, really. I mean, it makes me a little misty because I've been watching this for 25 years, and I think it was my story as well. I think for me, I had one hit when I went through my medical training, and I basically ignored my body through my 20s, gave up my 20s to medical training. And then right afterwards I had kids. And I think that's such a common story where you work hard on your career, then you have kids, and then you just emerge postpartum so depleted. And, maybe you go see a mainstream medicine physician who, hopefully they check your thyroid, but usually they're not looking at DHEA. They're not looking at testosterone. They're not looking at these hormones of vitality. And you're absolutely right. These women are like scraping the bottom of the barrel, wondering why at such a young age they feel so terrible. And no one bothers to do a full hormone panel. So, nutrition is incredibly important. I think the way that you architect your life, these lifestyle things are so essential. It's not that I'm saying, okay, I want you to be in a rush to go take a DHEA supplement or to start slathering yourself in testosterone cream. We want to be working with the intelligence of the body, using these diet and lifestyle levers first to get us as far as we can get in terms of hormone balance.
I love it. Well, let's go through some of those diet and lifestyle levers that we sort of touched on. You touched on making sure that you're having a daily bowel movement, that you're eating the cruciferous and allium vegetables. What are we talking about when it comes to protein intake and caffeine and alcohol? Like, what are we doing to ourselves that's keeping us at the bottom of the barrel, if you will? Let's bring people up.
Yeah. So I think it's important to look at, what are you treating? So when we're talking about coffee or alcohol, I think the essential piece is, I think of coffee in some ways as a high interest loan. Is this a loan you really want to be taking against your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis? Or is there some other way that we could be working to improve your energy and vitality? So that's not true for everyone. I do a lot of genetic testing. We know, I think you do this too, we know that about half the population is a slow metabolizer of caffeine. So I didn't realize this until I was in my 30s, that a cup of coffee it makes me a nightmare. I'm jittery, I'm raging at my husband, I'm probably snapping at my kids, and then I can't sleep at night. And then it just sets me up for this death spiral. So I can sometimes get away with a half cup of green tea, when I have to get up early, or I'm on the East Coast on book tour, that sort of thing. But for people who are slow metabolizers, we get all of the risks of drinking coffee and caffeine and almost none of the benefits. So we're the ones who have the sudden cardiac death. You see all these studies, the latest one in the New England Journal of Medicine, coffee is good for you. Then you see another study, coffee is bad for you. You have to divide it by genotype and really understand. You have to personalize it and understand the individual. So when it comes to getting into ketosis for women, I don't think that coffee is bad if you're a fast metabolizer. So if you're able to sleep well at night, because some people in nutritional ketosis get very activated, they get this kind of rev that happens as a result of ketone production. And then they become like, it's difficult for them to sleep. They're not getting the 2 hours of deep sleep that they need for their gut. They're not getting the 8 hours that really helps them show up with full potential each day. So caution with coffee. I would say that's sort of a yellow light. Alcohol is pretty much not on the table. If you want to do ketosis, if you want to change your metabolic flexibility, if you want to drop fat, you got to cut out the sauce, because alcohol slows down fat metabolism for 24 hours. So if you're
say that again, say that for the people in the back.
For the back. Well, I mean, I also have to say, I know people don't want to hear this.
That's the hard
I really
part.
get that. What's that?
I said, that's the hard part. It's like so many times you can sit down with someone and they're like, but I just need that one glass of red wine to get through the day, to get through the thing with the kids, to get through. And it's like a Band-Aid or like a blankie or a binky that we're holding on to, but it's not going to fix whatever the issue is that we need to just push through, work out, change. It's hard for everyone to hear, but if you really want growth, if you really want to change, and that's what your book is about, it's getting people from this place of that made you teary-eyed, that place of I am pushing through, I'm adding the caffeine, I'm calming down with the wine, I'm getting through. I saw a quote the other day that was adulthood is saying, in a few months when it slows down, ... And it's we have to be the brakes. We have to be the no.
Yeah. This is really looking to your future self. And what is it that you want for that woman? I think I agree with you. It's part of adulting, and it's an inconvenient truth. If I have a patient, I imagine you have patients like this too, who say, okay, I cannot stand this extra 15 pounds for another second. I will do anything to lose this weight and to fit into the clothes that are in my closet. And then you say, okay, how much are you drinking? I share half a bottle a night of wine with my husband. Okay, so we got to cut that out. Oh, no, I'll do everything else except that. But you got to realize that if that glass or two of wine is slowing down your metabolism, it goes to the front of the line with your liver, it totally cuts, right? It just gets in front of all the other toxins. And then your liver is busy dealing with the ethanol for the next 24 hours, slowing down fat metabolism. If you do that day after day, you have very little chance of being able to be that future self that you're looking for. The other way I look at it, I'm a physician. So if you can't, this is a 4-week ketogenic pulse. It is a therapeutic pulse. And I think of it in many ways as a medical treatment that requires some medical monitoring. If you can't give up alcohol for 4 weeks, then we've got bigger issues to talk about. It is a diagnostic test to look at how sticky your relationship is to alcohol.
I love it. I love it. I love that you're using it's like a strike mission. It's let's get in there. And especially when you talk about making sure that our detox pathways are open. If alcohol is skipping the line and you're not metabolizing old cholesterol or hormones or other toxins that you're coming in contact with, which we all are coming in contact with, talk about oxidative stress, talk about not being able to get into ketosis and burn fat. What's happening in these bodies when our detoxification pathways aren't open, but we're jumping into keto?
Well, it doesn't work. I mean, these are the keto refugees that I see in my practice. I imagine you see them as well, who come in and say, at work, we all went on keto and all of my male colleagues dropped weight, within a short amount of time. I gained weight, or, I only lost a small amount. And we want to be looking at, what are the reasons why this was not successful for you? And if I go back to, my first 3 attempts at the keto diet that didn't work, what I know is that the first time I wasn't counting macronutrients the way that I needed to be. The second time I was probably eating too much fat. So, we always hear that calories don't matter quite as much as hormones. I agree with that. I think hormones are more important, but calories still matter.
Yeah.
It's not like we can ignore them completely. And the benefit, of course, of nutritional ketosis is that you've got greater satiety. So it's easier to have that calorie deficit that could be associated with burning fat. So, the other thing that happens, I'll get a little more specific here. If you're not detoxing that fat and you have, for instance, I think of sort of the garbage fat, LDL, that's floating around in our blood, the low density lipoprotein. We have much more advanced ways of measuring this now, looking at LDLP as well as particle size. But what we know is that keto tends to raise LDL. Now, in some people, it's a small amount, it's 10% or less. It may not be clinically significant. We saw that, for instance, in the Verta trial. But in some people, it is significant. And that's why monitoring, I think, can be important. And it's part of why I like to use keto as a 4-week pulse, then reassess, define the carb threshold once you're in nutritional ketosis, see what carbs really help you in terms of that glucose disposal. So for instance, I can't eat sweet potatoes, makes me look like a diabetic, but I can eat squash. I can actually have butternut squash, which is just as satisfying to me. I can't have garbanzo beans, but I can have berries. So defining that carb threshold, really understanding, what triggers you, personalizing it can be very helpful.
I love everything you just touched on, that you, looking at your history and putting yourself into ketosis, you needed to figure out your macros. Well, you realized you were having too much fat, and then you needed to understand your carb threshold. So can we talk about macros and a carb threshold for people? And then how did you realize your bio-individuality when it came to specific foods like garbanzo beans, sweet potatoes, berries, and squash?
Yeah, great question. So with macronutrients, the classic keto is 70-20-10, right? 70% fat, 20% protein, 10% carbs. So the idea is that it's very low carb. It's got moderate protein because in a lot of people, if you get too much protein, that can raise glucose and take you out of ketosis. And then it's got a lot of fat. So what I found was that when I started first, and I just was, I got 7 keto cookbooks, and I just started making all of these foods. They were delicious, right? Like I had this lasagna that was richer than any food I'd ever eaten before. And I'd have 2 servings of it. What I realized was that I needed to focus on net carbs. And so that was a bit of a divergence from the keto folks, because a lot of keto people say net carbs can't use that. When it comes to keto, you've got to just pay attention to your total carbs. Some people say 10 grams a day, which I think is unsustainable. 20 grams a day, I think, is borderline unsustainable. So I pay attention to net carbs. And what I developed myself, and then I tried with dozens of patients in my practice, is to keep net carbs initially around 20 to 25 grams per day. And that has worked really well. And then we increased it by about 5 grams per day to define the carb threshold once you finish that 4-week pulse. So that's the structure that I use to define this carb threshold, and I use net carbs. And, I lost 25 pounds. I've been able to keep it off for about 3 years following this protocol. It's what has been very successful with my female patients. My male patients doesn't seem like they're quite as sensitive to, getting those prebiotic carbs that are so important. And let's see, you asked another question about, how did I get this bio-individuality? Well, there's a couple ways to do it. So the way I first started was there's a microbiome test that I think is really interesting called Day 2. And it's based on research from the past 10 years that was done in Israel at the Weizmann Institute. So Aaron Siegel is one of the lead investigators. There's a whole team of folks. And what they found is they looked at Israelis who are thinner than Americans, but they have a lot of issues with metabolic inflexibility and insulin resistance. And they found in relatively healthy Israelis that they could predict postprandial glucose, so glucose 1 hour after eating, by coming up with this algorithm. Now, no one knows exactly what's in their algorithm. It's based on something like 130 plus different analytes. But they found that the thing that was most important with predicting postprandial glucose was the microbiome. So this kind of reinforces the point you were making earlier about polyphenols and what it does to the gut microbes. So I use day 2 to create this bioindividuality. And they have an app, for instance, where you can look up garbanzo beans. And what was amazing to me was that all of these foods that I thought were so healthy, you know, I was making these shakes, these functional shakes every day. I was using a powder that had a score of like 1 out of 10. So it was not a good fit for me. You know, somewhere around 8 to 10 out of 10 is what you want to be eating according to this app. I found that sweet potatoes were way low. I had just gone on this detoxification where I was drinking another shake that I scored low on, together with apples and a lot of fruit. And these fruits were just a nightmare for me. And then this, again, was about 3 years ago. I started using a continuous glucose monitor, and it just confirmed everything that I saw with this microbiome test, with this algorithm from day 2. But the beautiful thing there is that you really, you know, your microbiome changes over time. So you have to like keep doing day 2 every 6 months. But your CGM just gives you this immediate biofeedback. I mean, I know you're already a convert with CGMs, but I just, yeah. I mean, I got mine right here.
We're both showing each other in the back of our arms right now.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
No big deal.
Exactly. Yeah, so I use this, as I know you do with your clients. I use it all the time with my patients. You probably are like me, and you've got, you know, the app that shows you all of your folks, and I've got a dashboard with all the data continuously on my patients, and I text them. I'm like, what did you just eat for lunch? Because your glucose is 180 and we need to deconstruct this, right? So that's what really helped me personalize and to get that immediate feedback that I could combine with how do I feel, like that interoception of tuning into your body, which was kind of beaten out of me in my 20s, but through the CGM, I've been able to reclaim it. So you don't have to use the CGM to go through the protocol in the book, but it does help.
I think if you're going to have the ability to have synergies around how you're eating, how you're feeling, and what you're seeing diagnostically, and you have that in your hand, it just speeds up the process. And then you feel, and especially nowadays when people want a quick fix, they want it to be everything to be better in like 2 days. And you're like, it's going to take time. And what I think is so lovely about a CGM or having your glucose, understanding where it's at, is that you can get on the scale all day, every day, but it's not actually, you can get the same results of dropping weight by watching your glucose drop. And that's what you're teaching people to do. Drop your glucose, drop your insulin, get into a state of ketosis that's healthy for women, because you know you're detoxifying, you know you're getting rid of that excess estrogen, you're not eating too much fat, you're understanding your carb threshold. And I think the key point of this is it's women, food, and hormones. We're not wrecking your hormones in the process.
That's right. I see a lot of wrecked hormones for people who do their best with a ketogenic diet and don't realize that, you know, for some women, going too low carb raises cortisol. It can raise uric acid. It can do all of these downstream things that I think a lot of folks don't realize. You know, I get patients all the time who are doing intermittent fasting. And, you know, maybe they're down to 1 meal a day. They're doing like,
oh man. Yeah.
Yeah. And their cortisol is through the roof. And they're wondering why they have so much belly fat and why this, you know, pretty significant restriction in their food plan isn't working. So often when it's not working, the problem is the hormones. We want to look to the hormones first to see, okay, what's going on? What's out of balance here? How could we work with, you know, that innate intelligence of the hormonal system rather than working against it?
So interesting. You mentioned uric acid. Can you explain what that is and what's the byproduct of? Do we want it? Do we not want it? What is it?
Yeah, so uric acid is somewhat complicated. The way that it's known by most people is that high levels of uric acid are associated with gout. And a lot of people think of gout as like this old man disease, and it's not. There's a lot of younger people, mostly men, who have, pain in their big toe and a flare that's associated with high uric acid levels. And it's really painful because you get these uric crystals in, for instance, your big toe. That's a classic place where it deposits. They're really sharp and painful. So I've got some patients with gout. We know that the typical triggers that raise uric acid, part of this urate metabolism in the body, are excess protein. So high protein organ meats are sort of one of the classic drivers of elevated uric acid. But sugar does it too. So fruit juices, things like that. Alcohol can also do it. I feel like I keep coming back to the problems with alcohol.
Yeah.
Detoxification, uric acid. Oh, it's a neurotoxin that shrinks your brain. Oh, it's, it slows down fat metabolism. But going back to uric acid, what we want is a uric acid that's less than 5.5. I like to run it significantly lower than that. And when people first go on a classic ketogenic diet, it can trigger gout symptoms. That's temporary. It's basically, the problem is that the way that the kidney disposes of urate is competitively inhibited by the increased ketones. So that's a temporary problem that resolves when you become keto adapted. So when you become metabolically flexible and you can switch back and forth, you can toggle back and forth between burning glucose or carbs and burning fat, kind of depending on what type of fuel is available. Once you become keto adapted and metabolically flexible, generally this resolves. And I'll also say one other thing, I'm not an internist, so uric acid I think of as kind of the purview of internal medicine, but there's a book coming out by David Perlmutter called Drop Acid. I'm sure you know about it, where he's talking about uric acid, and he thinks it's really important to measure along with glucose, and especially in people who are on a ketogenic diet, in that some of the folks who have a tendency metabolically, maybe genetically, to raise their uric acid or based on what they're eating, those are often the folks that don't do well with a ketogenic diet. So I talked before about how I think of a ketogenic pulse as a medical therapy that requires some monitoring. Part of the panel that I like to do after someone's done a 4-week pulse is to look at an advanced lipid panel, to look at uric acid, to look at measures of inflammation, and to also look at the detox pathways.
I love it. I love it. I mean, obviously it's a strike mission. You're going in with information around the hormones and coming out understanding how did this improve the body as a whole, which is just amazing. So let's lighten the conversation a little bit for people who don't want to know as much about uric acid and talk about hormone-friendly daily routine. So for someone who is deciding that they want to go through the Women, Food, and Hormones 4-week protocol, what's an example of a day? And does it change starting from like week 1 through week 4, or how does it progress?
Yeah, the first part of the 4-week protocol is to really make sure those detox pathways are open, because that's what sets you up for success. So if you're not pooping every single morning, feeling like, this is what should happen. So here's the sequence. You get out of bed. Hopefully, by the end, you're feeling really restored when you wake up. And I recommend that people drink about 12 to 24 ounces of fluids when they first wake up. That stimulates the gastrocolic reflex. So rather than relying on a cup of coffee to make you poop, that water, it could be water with electrolytes. You could add some fresh lemon. You could add some Himalayan sea salt. Electrolytes are incredibly important with glucose management and with ketosis, as I know you know. And so I recommend drinking, that fluid. And then you got to poop, and you got to feel like, like that was the best evacuation ever. That's what we're looking for. My husband calls them like Canyon Ranch poops. Like that's what I really consider them. Like some bulk. You want it to be like a swimmer that just sort of goes right into the toilet and not these little hard pebbles like a rabbit. You want it to be formed, Bristol scale. So that's what should happen every single morning. And you got to have that in place before you move on to the more aggressive nutritional ketosis. We've got to have those detox pathways open. So you're starting to bring in the vegetables. I recommend about a pound a day. And for people who freak out about a pound a day, you can put a lot of that into a smoothie and make it more convenient and easier to digest. And what I generally recommend is eating between about 10 and 6. So not lengthening the fasting window so much that it causes stress or raises cortisol, but aiming for, somewhere around, at least initially, about a 12 to 14 hour overnight fast. This again is part of the prep phase, and then building up to 16-8, such as eating between 10 and 6. I just find that people who aim for 10 to 6, of course, you can adjust it based on your social life and your sleeping patterns, but those are the people who are the most successful. And part of that day, of course, is some sort of objective witnessing of who you are in the world. So that could be meditation, it could be mindfulness, it could be prayer. I have a breathing app that I really like that I use every day. I do visualization. I like to go outside. I live in Northern California, so I like to go outside in the morning before the UV index is elevated. And that's where I meditate. I like to meditate outside to like birdsong and, hearing, being in nature. And I think that also helps with melatonin. And exercise. So I'm someone who has to exercise in the morning. That's what works best for me. If I wait until the end of the day, it's less likely to happen. And I think it's really important for my kids to see that. I want to think a lot about, even if this is, was my initial motivation, I want my 2 daughters to witness me not obsessing over weight, taking care of my body, having self-care be part of kind of a regularly scheduled day, and, just not buying into the diet trope and the fat shaming that is so much a part of our culture, but instead choosing to nourish my body with the best possible fuel. And occasionally having fun. It's not like I do this 24/7. I'm really rigid about it. But all of those things I think are an important part of the day. And then, for me, I typically work after I do this whole morning ritual with drinking fluid, pooping, and then some form of meditation, usually outside in nature, and then exercise. I typically work from about 10 to 5. And then I like to get current with my family. So that's where we make dinner and we really check in with each other and we do something as a family. So that's what I do. I mean, that's just one template that I think can be adjusted and modified for other people. Any changes you want to make to that, Kelly? Because I know you've got a really good self-care routine.
No, I think, it's really interesting when I do these interviews because and especially with women, I look at myself, we obviously have different career paths. That you are an MD with an amazing education and books and children, and I look at my life, I'm like, okay, like I have my private practice and I focused on my business and I wrote my books and now I'm in the depletion part of like, oh my goodness, I have an 8-month-old and, locking in that sleep and being pulled in every direction. And really all the time, it's just checking in with Chris. Like we have these family check-ins every week where I'm like, where are our boundaries? What do I need to do? And like, even this morning before this interview happened, I jumped on 5 minutes late and it's, my toddler is having a really hard time with the separation. And I love that you said that you have your check-in with your family later because we're having there's a real rub in me not being able to take care of myself because they need me, but also it's the going in and coming out with them. As we talked about before we started this interview, it's like, I'm just running downstairs to, grab a cup of tea or like grab my smoothie from the fridge. And I need to go upstairs with everything. Like I can't tease them or toy with their emotions that I'm coming back into the room and that I'm available. And so it's again, like this conversation is just going to come up in our family check-in of like, okay, like how am I fully present for them? Because if I'm thinking about work and I'm thinking about my workout, or I'm thinking about the things that I need to get done. Am I really in this present play time with Duplos? Like maybe not. And maybe that Duplo time, maybe my day needs to end at 3 or 4 and I need to lock in those like 2 solid hours of like scooting and playing where I know that my email inbox isn't full and that my clients don't need me and that I've moved my body, put my oxygen mask on first. And I think as parents and as entrepreneurs and as working women, and it's constantly focusing on like, what does the day-to-day look like so that I can keep my cortisol in check, take care of myself, keep my detox pathways open. And books like yours and conversations like this, just, I'm sure people are driving or running or listening in on this while they grocery shop and going like, what can I do in my life? How can I level up? How can I change? How can I check in with myself and have some boundaries or try something new? I love your daily routine. And I would say the only thing that I'm maybe trying to shove in is that Duplo time where it maybe isn't that present playtime that I really want to gift my children. And so it's always evaluating and growing as your life changes.
It is. I mean, that's really adaptation. That's our job in terms of evolution. And I have to say, my kids are older than your kids. And I remember just when my kids were the same ages as yours, and I just was like, like something's got to change, like this isn't working.
Yeah.
And I remember I was visiting a cousin who had twins, and her twins were like 18 months. And I would go with her to the park. It's like before COVID. Yeah. And her 2 boys would just go in opposite directions at high speed. And like, you couldn't go to the park one person with these twins, right? Like it was just so crazy. Yeah. And she just, this cousin looked at me and she's just like, when does it get better? Is it better after they turn 2? And I was like, well,
yeah,
it's more like 5.
Yeah.
And it was like heartbreaking to have to say that to her, but there's this really difficult time where you want to make sure that you're not scraping the bottom of the barrel and you're doing everything you can to make sure that your tank is full and that you can give from that place and not from the depleted place that is not good for you and not good for your family, not good for your partner, not good for your kids, not good for your cortisol, not good for your testosterone. It sounds like a lot of work, but it takes sort of these little micro adjustments that you're talking about that I think are the way to succeed with this process.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, like my wheels are turning. I know. I mean, there are so many ways that we can tweak our schedule, the way that we eat, the way that we sleep to support our hormones and how we feel, our ability to be metabolically flexible, keep our glucose in check. And I mean, there's so many things. It's obvious, like if someone wanted to have that time, they can get up earlier. Like they can do, I have children that wake up at 5:45. So I'm always jealous of the moms who are like, oh, my kids woke up at 7 or 7:15. I'm like setting the alarm for 4:30.
Oh, wow.
That
early.
means I need to be sleeping at 8:30 if that's the time I'm getting up. And if I can't make that happen, then I mean, I obviously think that sleep is so critically important, and so do you. So, I mean, just so much to think about, and so much to just work out on your own with your family always when it comes to taking care of yourself. But I love that you put this book out into the world. I love that you are giving women the tools to get into keto on their own, to do a keto, to get a pulse on how they respond to the ketogenic diet and if it's something that works for them or not in a really productive way, because I think if anything, they're going to come out pooping every day, detoxifying better, bringing their glucose levels down, and hopefully taking a break or slowing down on the booze. So as always, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing all your knowledge. Where can people find you and follow along? Where can they buy the book?
Yeah, so the book, Women, Food, and Hormones, is available wherever books are sold. You can go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, your local indie. You can also read more about it at my website, which is sarahgottfriedmd.com. The work that I do is at Thomas Jefferson University. So there's a website for the Marcus Institute of Integrative Health that has a lot of great resources as well.
I love it. And where can they follow you on Instagram?
Oh, at Sarah Gottfried, MD.
We'll put it in the show notes. You guys will follow along. We'll throw this up on IGTV, give you guys a sneak preview, but definitely check out the book. I loved every single page. So thank you again, Sarah, for being here and sharing your knowledge.
Thank you, Kelly. Such a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Be Well by Kelly. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Learn more at bewellbykelly.com and follow me on Instagram at bewellbykelly. I would love if you picked up my books, Body Love and Body Love Every Day. They're sold on Amazon and at all major booksellers.